You won't believe how a single phone call changed an entire neighborhood forever. Meet Randall Woodrow, a man so consumed by his own prejudice that he picked up the phone on his new black neighbor without a second thought. What happened next would shock the entire suburban block, because that neighbor was no ordinary resident, but the newly appointed chief of police in their quiet township. Before he could hang up, Randall found himself entangled in a life-altering confrontation that exposed deep-seated bias, forced hidden truths to the surface, and unleashed a chain of events no one could stop. Keep watching to see how it all unfolds. The morning sun spilled soft golden light onto Sycamore Ridge, a quiet suburban community nestled just an hour outside of Philadelphia. Families were beginning their weekday routines. Cars backed out of tidy driveways. Children shuffled their backpacks on sidewalks heading to school, and joggers in sleek athletic wear pounded the pavement. The faint smell of freshly mowed grass and blooming azaleas lingered in the air, giving the neighborhood an almost idyllic quality, like something you'd see on the cover of a local real estate magazine. Randall Woodrow, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, a slightly protruding belly, and a perpetual scowl, leaned against his mailbox that morning, sipping his coffee. He wore cargo shorts, even though summer hadn't fully arrived, and a t-shirt emblazoned with the name of a popular local diner. Sycamore Ridge was his domain. He loved to watch neighbors from his vantage point, particularly new ones, so he could size them up. The moment he saw a moving truck pull into the vacant house across the street the day before, his curiosity morphed into suspicion. The house had been on the market for a few months. Despite Randall's usual interest in the neighborhood's comings and goings, he never bothered to talk to the realtor. He assumed that whoever moved in would be like everyone else in Sycamore Ridge, solidly middle class, mostly white families, older retirees, or occasionally a younger couple with toddlers. But something in the way his heart pounded told him this wasn't the usual. The movers who arrived with the truck worked quietly and efficiently, carrying in tables, chairs, and large boxes labeled kitchen or books. Nothing seemed unusual about them. But when Randall spotted the tall, broad-shouldered black man in a crisp white shirt stepping out of a sleek, navy blue sedan, his eyes narrowed. At first, he didn't see much beyond the color of the man's skin. Bias and fear coursed through Randall's thoughts, each one uglier and more insidious than the last. He paid little attention to the man's gentle wave or polite smile. Already, Randall's mind raced to worst-case scenarios: drug dealer, ex-convict, or troublemaker. The fact that the man walked with the assured confidence of someone who had real purpose in life only deepened Randall's discomfort. That day, he lingered longer than usual around his mailbox, waiting, glaring, imagining all the ways this new neighbor's presence might be a threat. He told himself he was simply being protective of the neighborhood, of his own little universe. It never occurred to him that his behavior might be anything other than ordinary neighborly caution. Across the street, inside the newly purchased home, Chief Donovan Russell stood in a living room dotted by cardboard boxes. He was in his early 40s, tall, with a strong, athletic build earned through years of staying in shape for his demanding job. He had just been appointed as the new chief of police in the neighboring township of Northwood. Most of his boxes held the keepsakes from his last assignment in Philadelphia, where he'd grown up and served as a captain in the Philadelphia Police Department for many years. His wife, Angela Russell, an accomplished real estate attorney, was guiding the movers, telling them where to place the heavier boxes. Their daughter, 7-year-old Amelia, was in the adjacent room, excitedly exploring the new house and talking to her grandmother on her mother's cell phone. Donovan smiled, absorbing the tangible sense of new beginnings. This house, with its sprawling backyard and quiet surroundings, was meant to be a fresh chapter for his family. They had faced enough chaos in the city, and he hoped that Sycamore Ridge would be a warm, welcoming place. Late that afternoon, Donovan stepped outside to retrieve some items from the trunk of his sedan. He spotted Randall across the street, still lurking near his mailbox, wearing that sour expression. Not wanting to start off on the wrong foot, Donovan waved casually. "Hello there," he called out, voice friendly. "I'm Donovan Russell. Just moved in." Randall hesitated for several seconds before forcing a tight-lipped smile. "Yeah, I saw the moving truck," he replied curtly. He sipped his coffee again, not bothering to cross the street. Donovan felt an awkward chill in the air, but he pressed on. Gorgeous neighborhood. "My wife and I have been looking forward to joining Sycamore Ridge for a while." Randall nodded, his face unreadable, and muttered a half-hearted welcome before disappearing into his house. Donovan lingered for a moment, feeling a twinge of unease. Was Randall unfriendly to everyone, or was there something else going on? He shrugged, deciding it was best not to jump to conclusions. After all, one standoffish neighbor wasn't unusual. Every block had someone who preferred solitude or liked to keep to themselves. Donovan returned to his house, determined to unpack more boxes and make the interior feel like home. News traveled quickly in Sycamore Ridge. By the next day, everyone on the street knew about the Russells' arrival. Some neighbors saw Donovan's high-end car and guessed he must be a doctor or a lawyer. Others heard rumor that he had some connection to law enforcement. The rumors weren't particularly mean-spirited. People in the suburbs just liked to speculate. The local neighborhood association meeting was held once a month in a small community center near the main entrance of Sycamore Ridge. It typically attracted retired residents or those who wanted to weigh in on trivial matters like flower beds near the sign at the subdivision entrance or the scheduling of the annual summer block party. Randall attended these meetings religiously. In fact, he'd been a committee member for the past 5 years. He prided himself on knowing who was who in his neighborhood. So, of course, at that evening's meeting, he was quick to bring up the new arrival in conversation with the other long-time residents. "Anybody know anything about the new folks on Redwood Lane?" Randall asked, keeping his voice casual. Martha Greenwood, a friendly older woman who always wore pastel cardigans, replied, "I saw them earlier today. The wife is beautiful and so polite. They have a little girl cute as a button. They seemed lovely." Randall feigned a curious smile. "Oh, I'm sure they're nice," he said, letting the words hang, hoping someone would pick up on his hesitation. "Why, did you notice something strange?" asked Brandon Cole, another committee member, leaning forward. Randall shrugged. "Well, you never know. I was thinking about how property values might be affected, that's all." He tried to phrase it delicately, but the subtext was clear to a few. "I just hope they're, quiet." Martha, usually sweet but not one to miss undercurrents, frowned slightly. "They seem perfectly nice to me, and I'm pretty sure the husband is a police officer or something. I saw a uniform in the trunk when I was walking by." At that, Randall's eyebrows shot up. "Police uniform? Yeah, I'm nearly certain. Might be a county or state officer. I can't say for sure," Martha added. "Well, if he's in law enforcement, that's good to know," Brandon chimed in. "We could always use some extra security around here. I'm sure it'll be a good fit." Randall felt a twist in his gut. If Donovan was a police officer, that might grant him a certain respectability Randall wasn't ready to accept. But he kept his opinions to himself, at least outwardly. Inside, a stew of prejudices simmered. He wished he could pin down some reason, any reason, to prove Donovan was trouble, but so far, Donovan had been nothing but polite. That first Saturday in the neighborhood, Donovan took Angela and Amelia on a stroll around Sycamore Ridge to get acquainted with the surroundings. They walked past manicured lawns, neatly trimmed hedges, and the occasional cat sunning itself in a window. Angela took note of the quiet roads, the well-kept houses, and the friendliness of most people they encountered. Several neighbors stepped out to greet them, exchange names, and even invite them to barbecues. Amelia skipped alongside her parents, occasionally stopping to admire a butterfly or a patch of wildflowers. She was fascinated by the tranquility of the suburban atmosphere, so different from the busy streets of Philadelphia. "Can I ride my bike here, Daddy?" she asked, eyes gleaming with hope. "Absolutely, sweetheart," Donovan said with a laugh. "We'll get you a new helmet this weekend." Halfway through their walk, they spotted Randall on his front lawn, tinkering with a lawnmower. He looked up and seemed startled to see them so close. Angela, always gracious, raised her hand in a friendly wave. "Hi! Beautiful day, isn't it? We're just exploring the neighborhood." Randall nodded curtly, then turned his attention back to the lawnmower. "Yep, sure is," he mumbled. Silence blanketed the brief interaction. Donovan and Angela shared a glance. She shrugged slightly, as if to say, "I guess he's just not very social." They continued their stroll, talking excitedly about planting a garden in their own backyard. A couple of weeks passed. Donovan had formally begun his duties as the new chief of police for Northwood Township, about 20 minutes north of Sycamore Ridge. He'd introduced himself at the department, met with community leaders, and started forging relationships with local organizations. At home, he and Angela were settling in well, except for the occasional uneasy vibe whenever they crossed paths with Randall. Still, Donovan was too preoccupied with his new job to think much of it. Angela busied herself in her new law office closer to home, and Amelia began her first days at a local elementary school, quickly making friends. Then the first incident happened. It was a Tuesday evening around dinner time. Donovan, wearing civilian clothes but with his badge clipped to his belt, stepped out to fetch the mail. As he was sorting through letters, he heard raised voices from across the street. Randall was on his porch, yelling into his phone. The tone was agitated, like he was complaining about something. Donovan tried not to eavesdrop, but Randall was loud. Moments later, a patrol car from the local county sheriff's office turned onto the street. Donovan watched with confusion as the car slowed in front of Randall's house, then parked. Two deputies stepped out, speaking briefly with Randall, who gestured furiously in the direction of Donovan's house. Perplexed, Donovan approached the patrol car, politely holding up his hands in a no-threat gesture. "Is everything all right, officers?" Donovan asked, confusion etched on his face. The older deputy, Sergeant Clancy, recognized Donovan immediately from department bulletins about the new chief in Northwood. "Chief Russell? Yes, that's me." Sergeant Clancy cleared his throat, exchanging a quick look with his partner. "We got a call from Mr. Woodrow here about suspicious activity in the neighborhood." Randall stood, arms crossed. "I saw him ducking around that side of his house, messing with something. Looked suspicious to me. I just wanted to make sure nobody was breaking in." Donovan blinked in disbelief. He'd simply been adjusting the outdoor faucet on the side of his house minutes earlier, preparing to water the lawn. "I live here, Mr. Woodrow," Donovan said politely, though his annoyance seeped into his tone, "and I wasn't exactly hiding. I was turning on the water spigot." Randall shrugged, sticking out his jaw stubbornly. "Couldn't be too careful. People trespass. You never know." Sergeant Clancy shifted uncomfortably. "Chief, sorry to bother you. We'll just close this out as a misunderstanding. No need for further action." Donovan nodded, though irritation churned in his stomach. He forced a polite smile. "It's all right, Sergeant. Thanks for your time." As the deputies left, Randall gave one last suspicious glare before retreating into his house. Donovan stood on his lawn, the day's remaining sunlight casting his shadow in front of him. For the first time since moving to Sycamore Ridge, he felt an old, familiar tension in his chest, one he'd often felt in less enlightened neighborhoods during his earlier career. He shook his head and went back inside, not wanting to raise alarm for Angela or Amelia, who were in the kitchen working on a puzzle. That night, Donovan told Angela about the bizarre call. She frowned. anger sparking in her eyes. "That's ridiculous. He knows you live here." "We introduced ourselves," Donovan shrugged. "Either he's forgetful or just prejudiced. Let's not jump to conclusions yet." But Angela was unconvinced. She had grown up in an environment where she'd experienced subtle racism, and she wasn't one to dismiss the signs. "This is not a good start, Donovan," she warned. "Be careful." Over the next few weeks, the tension between Donovan and Randall only grew. Whenever Donovan or Angela took out the trash, Randall's blinds would rustle, as though he was spying on them. One afternoon, Angela noticed a suspicious glare from Randall while she was gardening in the front yard. And yet, in most other respects, life in Sycamore Ridge was pleasant. Neighbors were warm, Amelia had a thriving social life at school, and Donovan was busy reforming the police department in Northwood, ensuring that new training and community outreach programs were implemented. It was near the end of April when a bigger confrontation took place. Donovan was off duty for the day, wearing casual clothes as he cleaned out the garage. Angela and Amelia had gone shopping at a nearby mall. He had the garage door open, music playing softly as he sorted through a few more unpacked boxes. Suddenly, Randall's voice echoed down the driveway. "What's all this racket?" Randall demanded, striding up with a scowl. Donovan, genuinely confused, turned down the music, which was at a moderate volume. "Racket? Yeah, I can hear it from my house." Randall gestured across the street. "Thought you were blaring music and disturbing the peace." Donovan glanced at the small speaker in the corner, which was currently playing old Motown tunes at a volume he could barely hear once he stepped outside the garage. He calmly raised an eyebrow. "I didn't realize it was too loud. I can lower it if it's bothering you." "I'd appreciate that," Randall said, voice dripping with contempt. He stood there, arms crossed, as though waiting for an apology or an explanation. Donovan folded his arms. "Is there something else I can help you with?" Randall studied him for a moment. "No, just keep the music down. Some of us have to concentrate in our own homes without being disturbed." Donovan let out a long breath. "All right, Mr. Woodrow, I'll keep it down." Randall nodded once, pivoted, and headed back to his house. Donovan stood there for a moment, a cocktail of anger, disbelief, and concern swirling inside him. He had made countless arrests in his career, diffused high-stakes standoffs, and negotiated delicate community relationships. And yet, here he was, in what was supposed to be his peaceful home environment, feeling watched and harassed by a neighbor who had no legitimate grievance, just a deeply rooted prejudice. As far as Donovan could tell, despite the tension, the Russells decided to throw a small backyard birthday party for Amelia that weekend. They invited a few of her new friends from school, along with their parents. A couple of the friendlier neighbors stopped by to wish Amelia well. The backyard filled with the sounds of kids laughing, pastel balloons bobbing in the breeze, and the enticing aroma of grilled burgers and hot dogs. Angela noticed Randall standing on his back porch, staring over the fence like a sentinel. She tried to ignore him, focusing instead on the children playing a game of tag on the lawn. Donovan mingled with the other parents, handing out sodas and water, answering curious questions about his job as the new chief of police. Everything went smoothly until about halfway through the party, when one of Amelia's friends needed to use the bathroom. Angela directed the child toward the house, and moments later, the back door opened. A short, frantic knock on the doorframe startled Donovan. He turned to find a uniformed county patrol officer stepping into the backyard, looking uncertain as she took in the festive scene. "Officer?" Donovan greeted, setting down the plate of burgers he was carrying. "Sorry to interrupt," the officer said awkwardly. "We got a call about a loud disturbance in the backyard here. Complaints of suspicious individuals loitering. The entire party seemed to freeze. The parents, many of whom were white, exchanged glances, confusion etched on their faces. The children paused their play, eyes flicking to the uniformed officer. Donovan straightened his shoulders. "It's my daughter's birthday party, officer. I'm Chief Donovan Russell, Northwood PD." He showed his badge. The officer's eyes widened. "Yes, sir, I'm aware. Apologies, Chief." She looked around at the well-decorated yard, the birthday cake on the table, the harmless group of parents and children. This must have been some kind of misunderstanding. Donovan's jaw clenched, and his gaze flicked over the fence toward where Randall had been standing. Sure enough, the fence line was empty now, but Donovan could only guess who made the call. The officer cleared her throat. "I'm sorry, I'll close this call out. No issues here." She left, and a tense hush fell over the party. Angela tried her best to put on a bright face. She clapped her hands and called out, "Okay, who's ready for cake?" Over the next few minutes, the energy returned to the celebration, but the mood was irrevocably changed. Donovan noticed a few parents eyeing him with sympathetic or curious looks, and the unspoken question hung in the air. Why would anyone call the cops on a children's birthday party? The repeated calls to the local sheriff's department, clearly initiated by Randall, began to wear on Donovan's patience. He had moved here for peace, not to live next door to a man who acted like he was patrolling the Berlin Wall. By now, Angela's initial instincts were confirmed. Randall was harassing them, likely fueled by prejudice. One balmy evening, Donovan stayed up late in the living room, going through documents for a police reform initiative he planned to propose. Angela joined him, curling up on the sofa with a legal brief in her lap. She studied his troubled expression, the quiet tension written across his face. "You know you can't let this go on forever," she said gently. "He's called the police on you, on us, twice already. Someone might take it seriously next time." Donovan sighed, setting aside the stack of papers. "I know, but there's a procedure for dealing with nuisance 911 calls. Unless there's a pattern that disrupts public service, the department might not intervene directly. But you're not just a random person," Angela pressed. "You're the new chief, and this is happening in your own neighborhood." He frowned. "I can't just throw my weight around, Ang. I'm new on the job. It'd look like I was using my position for personal revenge." She nodded, understanding, but still bristling with protective anger. "So what do we do?" Donovan ran a hand over his close-cropped hair. "We document everything, keep a record. If this escalates, we'll have enough evidence of harassment." She leaned over, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Well, we're in this together." That night, they locked the doors and went to bed, each silently praying that Randall's antics would not intensify, that maybe he would just lose interest. But deep down, Donovan feared this was far from over. In the following days, Donovan confided his troubles to a colleague, Captain Maria Delgado, a longtime friend from Philadelphia who had also transferred to the Northwood PD at Donovan's invitation. She was a sharp, no-nonsense officer with a reputation for fairness. Over coffee in the department's lounge, Donovan explained the repeated calls and Randall's suspicious behavior. Maria shook her head in disbelief. "Unreal. Don't these neighbors know you're the new chief?" "I guess he does now, but that hasn't stopped him," Donovan replied grimly. "He didn't exactly apologize last time either. Could be a straightforward bigot," Maria said softly. "You know how it is. Some folks just can't deal with a black family in what they considered their neighborhood." Donovan nodded, tension in his jaw. "I've dealt with prejudice my entire life. Usually I brush it off. But this is where my wife and daughter live. I can't just let him keep calling the cops on us, scaring Amelia." "It's beyond infuriating." Maria leaned forward. "You might want to document these calls. If it becomes a pattern of harassment or false police reports, the county sheriff can take action." "I'm doing that, but I'm hoping it doesn't come to an arrest or a restraining order. We're neighbors, for crying out loud. I just wanted a peaceful life," Maria sighed. "People like Randall often create their own storms, Donovan. Be careful. He thanked her for the advice and returned to his office, more certain than ever that he needed to handle this delicately. The last thing he wanted was to escalate tensions in his own backyard. Summer arrived with warm breezes and longer days. The Sycamore Ridge Neighborhood Association announced the annual summer barbecue, an event held in the cul-de-sac by the community center. A bounce house for children, a potluck spread, and live music would be on offer. Angela and Donovan decided to go, partly to demonstrate that they were invested in the neighborhood. Amelia was excited to play with her friends and jump in the bounce house. When the day came, the event was lively. A canopy of bright streamers fluttered in the breeze, the aroma of grilled hot dogs and hamburgers mixed with the sweetness of cotton candy from a vendor cart, and neighbors milled about, chatting amiably. Donovan and Angela arrived, greeting people warmly, introducing themselves to those they hadn't yet met. Amelia ran off to join her friends near the bounce house. They quickly spotted Randall. He was near the grill, talking with a group of residents. A momentary hush fell over the small circle when Donovan and Angela approached. Randall avoided eye contact, busying himself with flipping burgers. Martha Greenwood, the neighborhood busybody but generally kind-hearted, greeted Donovan with a wide smile. "Chief Russell, Angela, glad you could make it." Donovan returned her smile. "It's nice to be here. Smells terrific." "Who's manning the grill?" Randall cleared his throat and finally looked up. "I am," he said, voice tight. "Want a burger?" A flicker of tension passed between them. Angela forced a smile. "Sure, if it's not too much trouble." Martha seemed to sense the awkward undercurrent. She quickly launched into a conversation about local events and new shops opening near Sycamore Ridge. Donovan played along, nodding politely. Angela politely thanked Randall for the burger once he handed it to her, carefully avoiding eye contact. The tension escalated when Brandon Cole, another neighbor, called out to Donovan from across the way, "Hey, Chief, I've got a question about safety in the area. Mind coming over here for a second?" Donovan excused himself, leaving Angela among the small group around the grill. Randall muttered under his breath, something like, "Always the center of attention." Angela glanced at him sharply, but she decided not to engage. She drifted away, found Amelia, and started chatting with the other parents. Meanwhile, Donovan addressed Brandon's questions about a rumored spike in petty theft in the region. As they talked, out of the corner of his eye, Donovan saw Randall approach the main pavilion where the neighborhood association had set up a microphone for announcements. Randall tapped the microphone, hushing the crowd. "Welcome, neighbors," he began, forcing a smile. "We have a wonderful turnout this year. Thanks for coming out on such a beautiful day." Just a few updates. He launched into announcements about the HOA fees, landscaping projects, and the upcoming fall festival. Finally, he glanced toward Donovan. "And as many of you already know," Randall said, voice carrying a hint of sarcasm, "we have a new resident who also happens to be Chief of Police in Northwood. Let's give him a warm welcome." A polite smattering of applause followed. Donovan nodded in acknowledgement, though his stomach churned. Randall continued, "We're glad to have him here to keep an eye on things. After all, we want Sycamore Ridge to stay safe and keep out trouble, you know." A few laughs followed, though they sounded uncertain. Randall's gaze flicked to Donovan briefly, then away. "Anyway, enjoy the barbecue." As the group dispersed, Donovan felt unsettled. Something in Randall's tone sounded like a veiled barb. He wondered if the man was trying to provoke him or degrade him in front of others. Angela, returning to his side, squeezed his arm in silent support. They spent another hour or so at the event, chatting with neighbors and letting Amelia play. Then, deciding not to let Randall's presence ruin the day, they left, hoping that ignoring him would be the best approach. Weeks passed without further incidents, no calls to the police, no unpleasant confrontations. But Donovan did notice Randall's suspicious glares whenever they happened to both be outside. It was as if the man were searching for an excuse, any excuse, to stir up trouble. Meanwhile, Donovan delved deeper into his role as chief, addressing real issues like drug concerns and youth outreach programs. One Monday evening, Donovan drove home late after a community outreach meeting. The house was dark except for a small lamp in the living room. Angela and Amelia were likely already in bed. As he stepped out of his sedan, he noticed a figure near his driveway, fiddling with what looked like a phone camera. "Hey," Donovan called, stepping forward. "Who's there?" The figure turned. It was Randall, phone in hand, angled toward Donovan's sedan. The camera flash flickered, capturing the license plate or something near it. Randall jerked back in surprise, nearly dropping his phone. "What are you doing, Mr. Woodrow?" Donovan demanded, carefully keeping his voice steady. "None of your business," Randall snapped, regaining his composure. "I have every right to be here on the sidewalk." Donovan moved closer, a spark of anger flaring in his chest. "You're taking pictures of my car. Why?" Randall glared, refusing to back down. "Is it illegal now to take pictures in my own neighborhood?" Donovan clenched his fists, but kept them at his sides. He forced himself to breathe. "It's suspicious behavior, to say the least. You want to tell me why you're doing it?" Randall sneered. "I do not. I suggest you step away. I'm not breaking any laws, officer." Donovan took a steadying breath, recalling all his training in de-escalation. "Mr. Woodrow, it's late. Go home." Randall's nostrils flared. "Don't tell me what to do." For a moment, Donovan wondered if Randall was about to swing at him or start shouting for the police. But Randall simply lifted his phone one more time, snapped another picture, and turned on his heel, muttering curses under his breath. Donovan stood on the driveway for a long moment after Randall had gone inside, feeling frustration and anger swirl inside him. Enough was enough, but what could he do without escalating tensions? The man was simply taking pictures from a public sidewalk. Offensive, yes, but not illegal. That night, Donovan hardly slept. He feared for his family's peace of mind, imagining Randall might be cooking up some wild conspiracy theory. Angela was equally shaken when he told her in the morning, urging Donovan to speak with local authorities about harassment. But Donovan hesitated. Randall was cunning enough not to cross clear legal lines. A misguided neighbor with deep prejudice could wreak havoc without necessarily breaking any laws. A few days later, Donovan got a phone call from an old friend who worked in the county sheriff's department. He hesitated, then answered. "Chief Russell," he greeted. "Hey, Don, it's Eric Simmons over at the sheriff's office. Listen, I hate to bother you with this, but we got a complaint anonymously about you. Someone claiming you're misusing police resources, that you bring your official cruiser home for personal errands, that you're flashing your badge around the neighborhood." Donovan massaged his forehead. He didn't even have an official cruiser. As chief, he often used his personal car for commuting. "That's ridiculous, Eric. I don't know who's feeding you this nonsense." Eric sighed. "I figured as much. This complaint is obviously unfounded, but we have to file an internal note. Just a heads up." Donovan thanked him and hung up, a sour taste in his mouth. He had no doubt where the anonymous tip originated. Randall was now trying to sabotage his career, or at least cause trouble with official departments. Donovan filled Angela in, and she was livid. She asked if they could file for a restraining order. Donovan told her they didn't have sufficient grounds yet. Randall's actions, though reprehensible, fell short of legally threatening or stalking behavior. One muggy July evening, Sycamore Ridge was battered by a torrential downpour. The sky flashed with lightning, thunder rolled ominously. Most neighbors stayed indoors, waiting out the storm. Donovan, still in uniform from a late shift, parked his car in the driveway, just as the heavens unleashed another wave of rain. He sprinted to the front door, water dripping off his brimmed cap. Angela met him in the foyer, worry etched on her face. "Hey, you're home safe," she breathed, taking his soaked jacket. "We just lost power a minute ago. We're lighting candles." Sure enough, the house was dark except for the flickering glow of candles and a single flashlight on the kitchen counter. Amelia was upstairs reading by flashlight, the thunder occasionally making her jump. Donovan stood in the dimly lit kitchen, water dripping from his uniform. He was about to reassure them when the doorbell rang. Angela frowned. "Who could that be?" Donovan set his jaw, half expecting Randall. He strode to the door and peered through the peephole. On his porch stood Randall, drenched, hair plastered to his forehead, an expression of sheer panic on his face. In the flicker of distant lightning, Donovan could see Randall's trembling shoulders. He opened the door a crack. "Mr. Woodrow, what are you?" Randall held up his hands, eyes wild. My basement is flooding. The sump pump is out because of the power failure. My wife is out of town. My phone battery is dead. I didn't know who else to call." His voice nearly cracked with desperation. Donovan's initial impulse was to recoil after everything Randall had done. It was galling to see him begging for help. But Donovan's instincts and sense of duty kicked in. He was still a police officer, sworn to protect and serve. And, ironically, he was also a neighbor. He glanced back at Angela, who was peering around the corner, equally stunned. He turned to Randall. "Okay, come in. Let's see what we can do." Randall stepped into the foyer, water pooling around him. He looked around the dimly lit house, eyes flicking from Angela to Donovan. He swallowed hard, perhaps realizing the absurdity of the situation, that the man he'd tormented for months was now his only lifeline. "Thank you," Randall mumbled, face flushed. Within minutes, Donovan grabbed a flashlight, some tools, and an old portable generator he kept in the garage. Together, the men made their way across the street through the driving rain, thunder rumbling overhead. Angela stayed back with Amelia, phone at the ready if they needed to call for more help. Randall's house was dark, except for the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the living room. They descended into the basement, where several inches of water already covered the floor. The sump pump, starved of electricity, was silent in the corner. The tang of wet drywall and musty odors filled the air. Donovan quickly assessed the situation, setting up the portable generator on higher ground and connecting the sump pump. Randall shone the flashlight, following Donovan's lead. Water splashed around their ankles as Donovan crouched to connect cables. Eventually, after a tense few minutes, the pump roared to life, spitting water out through the drain line. Donovan showed Randall how to operate the generator safely, instructing him to keep an eye on the gas level and the hose outside. Randall nodded, looking both relieved and ashamed. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice echoing in the dripping basement. "I didn't know who else to turn to." Donovan wiped water from his face, looking at the man who had caused him so much trouble. "I'm glad I could help," he said simply. Randall swallowed, stepping closer. "Listen, the first, I might have." He trailed off, clearing his throat. "I might have misunderstood your presence in the neighborhood," he finally managed. "I guess I never gave you a chance." Donovan wanted to snap back, to demand an apology for the months of harassment, the calls to the police, the slander. But in that moment, with water dripping around them in a dark basement, he realized that the only way forward might be to accept that people can change if they're given a moment of clarity. He simply nodded. "Let's talk about it another time. For now, let's get this water out before it causes more damage." Randall seemed to sense Donovan's restraint. "Yes, of course," he murmured. They worked side by side for nearly an hour, the generator keeping the sump pump powered, water levels receding. By the time they finished, both men were exhausted, clothes soaked and muddy. Randall flicked on a battery lantern, his eyes haunted by exhaustion and something that looked like remorse. Later that week, the skies cleared. Randall returned the portable generator to Donovan, ringed the doorbell with shaky hands. Donovan stepped outside, noticing Randall's subdued demeanor. "How's your basement?" Donovan asked. Randall managed a smile, though it looked forced. "Mostly dry. A bit of damage to the carpet, but I'll manage." Donovan nodded, taking the generator, glad it worked out. Randall hovered, as though summoning the courage to say something. Finally, he let out a sigh. "Look, Donovan, Chief Russell. He paused, struggling. "I've been a jerk, more than a jerk, actually. I called the cops on you, spread rumors, because I was suspicious, or maybe just hateful. I thought you'd be trouble in this neighborhood. And when you said you were a police officer, I thought, I don't know." Donovan remained silent, letting Randall speak. "My father was a detective," Randall continued. "We had some conflicts growing up. He was rough around the edges. I guess I learned the wrong lessons from him. Learned to assume the worst when I see someone who doesn't look like me. I was wrong." He swallowed, eyes darting to the ground. "I was so wrong. You saved my basement the other night. And you're just a guy looking out for your family, for your daughter." Donovan exhaled slowly. "Randall, you caused us a lot of hurt. I won't pretend that can just vanish because of one night of cooperation." Randall nodded vigorously. "I know. I owe you and your family an apology. A real one." His voice shook. "I'm sorry. I won't blame you if you never forgive me, but I'm sorry, Chief. And I'm ready to make amends, if you'll let me." A heavy silence followed. Donovan glanced over his shoulder, imagining Angela watching from inside. He recalled how upset she had been, how frightened Amelia was whenever the cops showed up at their doorstep. Part of him wanted to tell Randall to shove his apology where the sun doesn't shine. But Donovan also knew that bridging differences and forging unity was part of what he believed in, both as a man and as a police officer. He extended a hand slowly. Randall stared at it, then grasped it in his own. "Thank you," Randall whispered, tears welling in his eyes, though he fought them back. Donovan nodded. "If you really want to make amends, talk to the neighbors too. Clear up whatever rumors you spread. And never, ever call the police on anyone in this neighborhood again unless you have a real emergency." "I promise," Randall said, voice hoarse. The days that followed weren't magical. Randall didn't instantly transform into a social butterfly, but he no longer stared from behind the blinds. He no longer scowled whenever Angela was in her garden, and he stopped calling the authorities with bogus claims. In fact, he quietly told a few neighbors that he'd been mistaken about the Russells, praising Donovan for his help during the flood. Word spread that Randall had apologized to Donovan. Some neighbors commended Randall for owning up to his mistakes. Others, aware of the depth of his prior behavior, were less forgiving. Yet, there was a sense that the neighborhood had collectively taken a step forward, a small victory against prejudice. On the professional front, Donovan was able to squash any rumors or false reports that had come from Randall's anonymous calls. The county sheriff's department closed the file, chalking it up to an unfounded complaint. But Randall faced his own share of karma. Unbeknownst to him, some of the neighbors he'd spoken ill to had grown wary of his gossip. A few of his close acquaintances distanced themselves, not wanting to be linked with someone who would harass a family for no legitimate reason. Randall felt that sting in the cold shoulders and the polite but distant greetings he received. One weekend, Martha Greenwood confronted Randall during a block party setup. "I can't believe you stooped so low to call the cops on a child's birthday party," she said pointedly. "You owe Angela an apology, you know." Randall's cheeks burned. He looked to the ground. Yeah, I do." True to his word, Randall later sought Angela out in her front yard, where she was planting new rose bushes. He stammered through an apology, eyes rimmed with genuine regret. Angela, though still guarded, nodded quietly, accepting his olive branch. "Time will tell, Randall, but I appreciate you trying." A few months later, Sycamore Ridge was preparing for its fall festival. The leaves turned crimson, gold, and burnt orange, lining the streets with vibrant color. Amelia started third grade, excelling in her new school. Angela had become a familiar presence at the local courthouse, building a name for herself in real estate law. Donovan was firmly established as the new chief, his community initiatives earning accolades from local leaders and residents. He even partnered with a local youth center, the Philadelphia Dream Program, to mentor kids from nearby neighborhoods, showing them that police officers could be allies, not enemies. In a twist that stunned many, Randall quietly joined a local community program that promoted diversity and inclusion. Perhaps he was motivated by guilt or a genuine desire to change. He attended workshops, sat through uncomfortable conversations about racial bias, and began volunteering at an after-school center. It wasn't a 180-degree transformation overnight, but it was a start. One crisp Sunday afternoon, Donovan found Randall on the sidewalk, struggling to fix the chain of his bicycle. He had decided to give cycling a try, hoping to improve his health and maybe relieve stress. Donovan stopped, glancing down at the rusty chain. He knelt, offering assistance. Randall handed over the wrench, exhaling a sigh of relief. "Thanks," Randall muttered. "I've never been good at this mechanical stuff. I guess I always thought I could do things on my own." Donovan managed a small grin, recalling the tumultuous months behind them. "Sometimes we all need a little help," he said, gently snapping the chain back into place. Randall stood up, tested the pedals. "I guess so," he said softly, a note of humility in his voice. For Donovan, it wasn't about becoming best friends with Randall. It was about living in peace, ensuring his family felt safe in their own home, and forging a community where everyone could coexist without fear. Randall's slow but evident transformation was proof that sometimes hearts could be changed, though the damage done would still need time to heal. Donovan wasn't naive. He knew prejudice can lurk in quiet corners, ready to resurface. But for now, on that sunny sidewalk in Sycamore Ridge, the storm had passed. When bitter prejudice collides with a heart determined to protect and serve, amazing things can happen. This story proves that even the most deep-seated biases can begin to dissolve when confronted by genuine compassion and unwavering integrity. Chief Donovan Russell came face to face with a neighbor who judged him solely by the color of his skin. Yet, through acts of kindness and steadfast resilience, Donovan not only diffused the hostility, but turned a sworn enemy into someone ready to re-examine his own hatred. Now, if this tale of transformation spoke to you, if it reminded you of the power of empathy and second chances, please take a moment to share your thoughts. Like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that prove love can triumph over hate. Together, let's keep these important conversations alive.